Mark Sewers.
Thank you, Mr. Mundell. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. And congratulations to the member for South Norfolk for opening this debate so aptly. When I was elected last July, I did not imagine that one of my contributions in Westminster Hall would be on the subject of video games. It wasn't on my bingo card, or again, maybe more aptly, it wasn't in my inventory. But here we are, and I am glad we are here because while video games might not often feature in parliamentary debate, the issues raised today affect far more than the gaming industry, juggernaut though it is. They go to the very heart of consumer law, ownership rights, and the path we are on in a digital age. Now, it's worth noting that I'm speaking today as the Vice Chair of the APPG on consumer protection, so some of my arguments are primarily going to focus on that dimension. It's also worth saying that video games in their own right have definitely been part of the public discourse many times since their widespread adoption as a medium for entertainment. Like everyone, I've heard the common questions about their merits, their impact on young people, whether they cause brain rot, whether they inspire violence, and so on. Although I'd argue they don't do those things, certainly not the last two, this is not what the debate's about. It's not whether they're good or bad. It's about something much more fundamental. So when you buy something, should you have the right to keep it? And let me be clear about the ask here. I'm not demanding that publishers keep servers running forever. Campaigners are not asking for indefinite technical support. We are not asking these companies to keep pouring resources into a game that they themselves are finished with. What we are asking is fairly simple, that publishers should not be able to deliberately disable every copy of a game that consumers have already purchased, leaving them with nothing. Now, I want to talk first about the end of support and what that means in this context. Normally, end of support means that if something goes wrong, the customer's on their own. And that's fair enough, perfectly reasonable, depending on the context. An iPhone that you bought 14 years ago no longer receives updates from Apple, but can still be unlocked and take calls. An old toaster can still toast your bread, even though it doesn't have smart sensors and a touchscreen. And a decades-old printer no longer receives updates from the company that made it, but it still prints documents. But what we're seeing here is different. It's as if you bought that printer and one day the manufacturer sent out a signal that deliberately stopped it from working at all, claiming it had reached the end of support. So that's not support ending, that's obsolescence, which has a very different meaning entirely. Of course.
Thank you. First of all, thank the member of Norfolk South mentioned Grand Theft Auto. The main developer for the new version of Grand Theft Auto 6 is Rockstar Leeds. I'm sure the honourable friend and myself both have many constituents who work there. But on the issue of obsolescence, many people create private servers and play the games on these private servers. I myself am a big fan of Assassin's Creed, where many of the versions have been made obsolete by Ubisoft. But the people involved can keep those private servers going if there's an end of service patch that allows that to carry on. And so you effectively don't have that built-in obsolescence. And it's a very simple thing to do and should be part of consumer protection.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. When the boundary review took place a few years ago, I was very disappointed to see that Rockstar Leeds was not drawn into my constituency. So I'm very jealous about that. However, I will say that I do still have constituents that work there. And I do agree entirely with his point. It's almost like he's read a few pages on in my speech. You absolutely can have private servers that take care of it. It doesn't require the developer to keep things running or to put their own resources endlessly into a game to keep it alive. Consumers can do that themselves. And of course, as I was saying, the publisher should have a duty to ensure that the game, purchased and owned by the consumer, remains playable in some way. And it's not about burdening publishers. It's not about government overreach. It's about ensuring the publishers do not have the right to deliberately disable products that people have already paid for. If we were talking about mobile phones or any of the other things that I listed earlier, I suspect this debate would resonate even more strongly. But the principle is the same. If we don't act now, the use of this model and the erosion of ownership rights may spread to other areas. Now, history is littered with examples of governments acting too late, only to find out what could have been fixed early with minimal effort has grown into a much larger problem. I think that the warning signs are here in this industry, and to act now would be far less painful than to wait until this practice has become entrenched. And as we know, consumers are noticing. Campaigns have started. The reason we're even here today is that nearly 200,000 people in the UK have signed a petition demanding action on this specific area. The Stop Killing Games campaign, a consumer movement started by YouTuber Ross Scott, has shone the light on this issue, but not just here in the UK, across Europe and beyond. The European Citizens Initiative reached over 1.4 million signatures. I heard that referenced earlier. So it's not a niche concern of a few people, but a growing movement of consumers who feel that their rights are being undermined. Now, my office has corresponded with Ross, and I'm very grateful for the information he gave me ahead of the debate. He really is a champion of these issues. And I've done my own research too, and there are some examples I'd like to go through. The first is The Crew. This was a game released in 2014, costing consumers between 40 and 60 quid on average. Sold about 12 million copies, but it was shut down in 2024 with no way of being played. Now, Ubisoft, to their credit, did offer refunds to recent purchases, but certainly not to the original ones. And whilst it was largely an online game, it did have a single-player component that was unplayable when the servers went down. That's one example. Another example that Ross gave me was Lawbreakers. So this is a game that I imagine would have been popular with certain members of the previous Parliament, but it survived a year before it was shut down in 2018. Babylon's Fall, no refunds, despite the game being unplayable less than a year after launch. It may not have been the best game, but the principle still stands. It was made, sold, and then pulled with no refunds. And of course, just this summer, it was announced that Anthem will no longer be playable from January next year, only a few months' time. As of December 23, it had sold 5 million copies, and it had made over $100 million in digital revenue. An additional $3.5 million had been spent on in-game purchases, and all of that money is now gone. Meanwhile, other games like Guild Wars have been running for over 20 years and are still going strong. The point is clear, even though the industry is not. There is no standard, there's no transparency, and there's no certainty for consumers. So, in response to this petition, the government has said it has no plans to amend consumer law. And while I respect the government's position, I can't help but observe that what's happening in this space could be perceived as a breach of consumer protection from unfair trading regulations. Now, those regulations prohibit traders from hiding information that consumers need to make an informed choice. And yet, when you buy a game today, you are almost never told how long it will remain functional. You are sold a one-time purchase, but the publisher reserves the right to terminate it at any time for any reason, of course.
Member for giving way. So in fact, one of my constituents has written to me about feeling misled when the industry uses the word buy for video games that can later disappear from their digital library. So does the honourable member agree that we need transparency so consumers know exactly what they're paying for at the point of purchase, and clarity that buy should mean buy and not borrow until revoked? Thank you.
I thank the member for her intervention, and I couldn't agree more. It goes back to that point I was making earlier. The fix in this area could be as simple as that. That transparency, that if you are purchasing a game, it is crystal clear that they could deactivate it at any point. However, I do want to go further and say that we need to retain something that ensures publishers make the game playable for consumers long after they have pulled support from it. Now, just briefly going back to The Crew, the game did not need to be shut down. Ubisoft could have patched in offline play or allowed private servers, as my honourable friend for Leeds Central and Headingley made reference to earlier. So going forward, I think the ask from many consumers to the industry is pretty simple. If they plan to kill the game, please ensure consumers have a reasonable option to continue using their products for the single-player experience or on private servers. Some gamers, including one of my Leeds South Western Morley constituents, who I promised I'd raise this in today's debate, they've waited years for some certain games, including the remake of Knights of the Old Republic, which I'm told is one of the greatest games of all time. Imagine, then, if Saber Interactive released the final version of this game, which I know they plan to do at some point in the future, only to then pull it a year later, how devastated those gamers would be. And that's what we're trying to stop here today. And let's not forget, we're not talking about a small, powerless industry. We're talking about publishers that generated a combined total of $455 billion in revenue last year alone, if you account for all types of gaming. So by most industry measures, the global video game sector is now larger than the film and music industries combined. Analysts at Forbes say gaming is now the dominant entertainment industry. So the costs of ensuring long-term playability are negligible when compared to the budgets of these major publishers. We're talking about tens of thousands of pounds, sometimes nothing at all, again, set against budgets in the tens or the hundreds of millions, combined with the revenue that's in the billions. So I just want to be clear once again, this is not just about video games. Our greatest fan across the Atlantic, Elon Musk, has already shown us with Tesla that features in cars can be remotely disabled, even when the original buyer has already paid for them. So this technology already exists to remotely modify products in a way that the consumer may not have been reliably informed about at purchase. So what's stopping the progression of these modifications to rendering purchases totally and utterly unusable? Do we really want to wait until our phones, our fridges, our cars are affected by this before we act in this small way on what is a relatively small area? So my ask today is very simple. I urge the government to revisit this issue and to meaningfully engage with the asks of this petition. It's not too late to change the law or issue guidance in some way on what should happen in these circumstances with games that go offline. But if we do fail to act, the consequences for consumers, especially in the age of digital ownership, could be significant later on. This is about putting people first, a proud tradition of the Labour Party that I am a proud member of, ensuring that consumer rights are protected, not just today, but for the future. It's very clear to me that when you buy something, it should be yours to keep, not just until the seller decides otherwise. Thank you.